cringy. That's how the opening of this portion of Rachel and Leah's story feels to me. At least that's how it feels now. It's not how it's always felt. Typically, the story of Leah and Rachel and the trickery / unjust nature of behavior by Laban is told from the perspective of Jacob. I've heard that angle preached so many times that I truly don't know if I can differentiate between what I've been told or preached or what I just think on my own. This last week, though, reading the stories through the lens of this particular challenge raised some new cringy things. Leah is described as having less than appealing eyes. Different words are used depending on the version or the translation that you decide to read. While Rachel is said to have a beautiful face and a beautiful figure. You could say, and it has been, I'm going to just say mansplained this way, that these are simply observations. But think about the descriptions of every male in Scripture to this point. Are you able to describe their level of attractiveness? No, you're not. And yet for those two, what we know is that Leah is the older one, but she's also the less appealing one. That's what we know. The further that we get into this little small section of Genesis, we see the deeper implication. Rachel is the one potential husbands find attractive, and Leah is the one who is meant to be married first. Therefore is seen as a bit of a burden because who wants to marry her? And as terrible as it is that these two women are reduced to how attractive they are, the deeper implication is that they are not their own. They belong to Laban and are the bartering objects in exchange for work. Why? So that they can eventually belong to Jacob. Double cringe. Enter the whole wedding debacle. If you've not read the text, this would be the time to go back, hit pause, go back and read those because, whew. Wilcox raises a question that I never heard from the pulpit, though I think it belongs in the pulpit. And one of them is this: who was in on it? Obviously, Leah was to at least some degree. Even if she didn't want to marry Jacob, she was fully aware that it would be her and not Rachel who was getting married that day. When did Rachel know? This might be doomsdaying it a bit, or a bit too many episodes of Charmed, perhaps. But I see it as Laban somehow restraining Rachel against her will and coercing Leah against her will to deceive Jacob into marrying her. So much therapy is needed. There are a lot of possibilities. Who was complicit and who wasn't? Who was coerced and who wasn't? Did Rachel even want to marry Jacob? It's heavily implied that she did, right? It's kind of idealized, in fact. But is it certain? And Leah? Did Leah even want to be married? What did it do to her psyche to be forced to marry a man who she knew very well did not want to marry her, and under a disguise? Imagine what that does to her image of self. Triple, quadruple cringe. In the end, in 1 week, Jacob is married to Leah and then to Rachel, two sisters who might have had a decent relationship prior to Jacob's arrival. We don't really know. But after marriage, they enter a pretty significant season of competition, born, pardon the pun, from who can produce the most children, read sons. And then when things become dire, both Rachel and Leah offer up their maids, Zilpah and Bilhah, to Jacob. And to be clear, neither Zilpah nor Bilhah had any say here. They didn't get even to name the children that they bore, and they did not share the full rights of wives. Their purpose was to conceive, and they were put in that position, at least based on the information that we have, by Leah and Rachel. The other woman on deck for today is Chloe, who Paul mentions very, very briefly in his first letter to the church in Corinth. She is a small blip in a larger text about Christian unity, and until I read this week's section in the women's lectionary, I'd never even really noticed her name. It's really sad. What I appreciate about Chloe is that we have basically only 2 words about her, but those words tell us so much. Chloe's household tells us that Chloe, for whatever reason, whatever life circumstance, was the head of her household, much like Lydia. We also know that Chloe knows Paul, and Paul knows her. She is a woman of faith, and she has a strong enough relationship with Paul to tell him about divisions that she is seeing within the early church. And Paul respects her report enough to write about it, because it is basically the opening to the letter. I think it can even be argued that it is what Chloe reports that prompts this first letter to the Corinthians. That's a big deal. In 2024, when people are again or still trying to reduce the role and authority of women in the church and in their homes, Chloe's story is a very big deal. She provided evidence of division in the church to Paul then, and today provides evidence to us now and to those who seem to need it, that women have been called to the ministry of the gospel since day one. I could stop here, wrap things up nicely, saying how nice it is to recognize the progression of so much from the time of Zilpah and Bilhah, of Leah and Rachel, to a woman like Chloe. And all of that would be true, but it wouldn't be enough. These texts reveal a deeper systemic issue that goes so far back. Not to God. I fully, with every ounce of my being, believe that God does not support or desire any kind of patriarchal situation. These systems do, though, go back to early civilizations and societies, just not to God. If you want more on that, read Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, if you want more context. The bottom line is that going back even before Leah and Rachel, we see the sexualization of women, women being viewed as objects of value to be owned and traded, women who are viewed as objects of value, women in competition with other women, and women who hold what little threads of power they have and are so enmeshed in that system that they exert those little pieces of power into the same limitations over other women, as Leah and Rachel did to Zilpah and Bilhah. Unfortunately, many women and people of color and people of the rainbow community can see themselves in the experiences described in today's texts. feeling undervalued like Leah because they are told and believe they do not measure up to societal beauty and therefore are not as worthy as another. Viewing one another as competition rather than helping each other. Battling for top recognition. Hurting or holding others back for the false sense of power and superiority it provides. Sisters, we need to stop putting our energy into the trap of comparison and stop allowing false constructs to give us our level of worth and value. Let us instead come together and change the religious systems that feed the lies and claim the value, the worth, and the call that God placed on the life of Chloe, just as God placed on you and as God placed on me. And just how do we do that? You guessed it. We speak. We are called for such a time as this. She is called. She's speaking. Will you join me? Will you join me in speaking, in tearing down these false constructs, in lifting one another up, and in spreading this truth that needs to be told? If so, give it a like, a comment, a share, maybe even click that little subscribe button. I want to keep this ride going, and I need to know if you want to keep it going too.